I mean, with the agree, but
It's a good thing you didn't take my advice.
So first up, we have vertical housing development zone. Amy Koski.
Good afternoon. I'm here to talk about program fees because we would need to put these into the master fee schedule. So I have a draft resolution for you tonight and thought I'd walk you through what we're proposing. And later tonight we'll talk about the ordinance for all of this. So as you may recall, I've got the map up here of the newly approved boundary as of October of this year, and Senate Bill 310 passed in the state legislature in July allowed local jurisdictions to designate area within the vertical housing zone program, thereby removing Oregon Housing and Community Services from the designation process. So we made it in just in time. They approved our expansion, but they will no longer be doing that. And in addition, this Senate bill established requirements for the transfer of the administration and certification of vertical housing development zone projects to the local jurisdiction. Again, those were previously approved by OHCS. So just to kind of fill you in briefly, the program is currently in a down period because of that transfer of authority. So the state's not administering local or administering project applications, and then we won't be authorized to do that until January 1st of 2018. So nobody's approving applications, which is why we are bringing an ordinance before you later at the regular session, and why we're talking about the fees that would be in conjunction with that.
The January 1st is a state mandated time frame, right?
Yeah, it's just the point at which we can start to administer it if we're ready.
Right. Thanks.
And let's see, the process to date, we came before you a couple times, and then in July got authorization to apply to expand the zone, and then we returned to clarify some details in the fall related to the sunset clause and the local criteria requiring a green building certification for any of these vertical housing projects. So that's where we stand today. So the state statute allows for us to have a project monitoring fee for project applicants, and that can be collected at the time of the application, and then also to cover city's actual or anticipated costs of monitoring and addressing compliance of those certified projects. So we have, this comes from the state statute, and then you'll also see it in the draft ordinance that we'll propose later tonight. The city may consider factors including but not limited to the items that are listed up there, but size of the project, number of residential housing units, amount of commercial workspace including live-work units, level and amount of staff and other services involved, supplies, equipment, fuel, and the number of separate sites and or buildings. So it's a little bit broad in how we can think about that, but including all of those things as reasons why we would.
Those are not what we're limited to considering, correct?
I think it says, and not, without limited, not
yes,
something to that effect.
yeah, it says
yeah,
including but not.
Yeah. And so what I've got here on the slide is what Oregon Housing Community Services has had for the past. I couldn't get a true answer, but the state believes it's been in place for at least 10 or 15 years. No one's changed their fees. And so it's the $550 application fee. And then they separated out project monitoring for market rate residential, which was another $150, and then slightly a little bit more for the low income, or a mix of market and low income at $200.
And that's per year?
This is a one-time fee at application.
But per unit, right?
No.
No.
Just a
I thought
one-time
it
flat
was-
fee.
From what you had in here, I
This
thought.
was just a
For
flat
you,
fee of
flat fee.
150.
Flat fee of 150, and for that, you're expected to make sure that they are still residential units, that they are still low-income units. that
Well, some
the
of them are
building was
market rate.
Built green. Well, the point
Yeah.
I'm making is
All that monitoring.
all of that monitoring over a period of 10 years for $150.
Well, on the state level, but that's not
That's the
what-
state level.
But that's not what we're... yeah.
I'm just pointing out all of the things that are
Yeah,
included in
Uh-huh.
but that's part of why we're recommending that.
Yeah.
When I talked to the state coordinator, he felt like it was a low fee and hasn't been revisited, probably
I'd be
needed to have
shocked to
been,
see
so.
such a low
And also
fee.
backwards. It makes
And
no
backwards,
sense.
exactly. So
Yeah,
he
I'm
flipped
like,
that.
really?
Well, I mean, the reason is because it's going to take more work to make sure that those units
But
are
it's
still
a disincentive.
low income.
affordable.
It's a disincentive,
I mean, not much of one, but
Yeah.
still.
$50, but that's why. Is because you're going to have to make sure that the floor of residences that are being
I understand that, but if that's what you're trying to incentivize, that doesn't make any sense. Just
yeah.
So good. Maybe I'm in the right. Gosh, I can't get onto the screen. Maybe I'm in the right ballpark. Then I was assuming that council may want to see us incentivize low income as opposed to making it more restrictive with a little higher fee, but a higher fee nonetheless. So what we're proposing is maintaining that application fee, $500. That could be debated, but started at $500, and then so the way that this would work is we're faced with this right now. We have a couple of potential applicants, and they're saying we're going to need project pre-certification. We need some approval before we even get financing that we're in the ballpark, that we can generally receive some exemption on a certain number of floors for what we're proposing. So that there would be an application fee that we would take up front at the time of application, and we'd go through the whole review. We need to see their plans, we need them to run the calculations, we'll review those calculations, and then a year or two down the road, when construction is complete and they've received their certificate of occupancy, we would essentially need to receive all those documents again, have them updated if they change, which they likely will have, and they'll resubmit. We'll have to re-go through that whole review process. So that's why we're doing it at the front end and then again at the end. Mm-hmm. And then basing the end fees on a percentage, a fraction of a percent on the total permit valuation for both market rate and then the affordable.
So again, just a one-time fee.
It is a one-time fee.
So I'm going to go back to what I started with before. Without some form of monitoring, what is to keep them from having low-income people in there the first year, and then no cause evicting them or raising the rent 100%, and now we're at market rate, and they got whatever percentage they got for the land value.
So this is built in there is continuous monitoring. So we have all of the rights in the ordinance to go and check or ask them for documentation or physically go in the building and look and see what's happening. And then we can have repercussions for not complying.
So I would have some pretty specific values as to what that documentation could be, and it would literally be a list of current rents.
Well, I mean, you want to give the city as much flexibility as possible, right? You
Right,
want to
but
limit.
if you don't put some of this in there, they're going to say you don't have that's proprietary information. You do not have the right to ask me that. That is not part of this. Without us saying specifically.
Well, because the thing conditions it on keeping them at affordable housing, I think, yeah.
We would find ourselves in a lawsuit. I can almost guarantee it. That's how hard it's been to get rents out of people. Rent numbers.
Well, because they haven't applied to us for anything.
They desperately do not want us to have that information.
Well, wouldn't we have to have something like that in the beginning anyhow? Just
We would.
the difference between, I mean, we had how
Well, I
need to
get-
provide something to us, right?
But he's getting at
For us.
5 or 10 years later.
Yeah,
When
no,
we think
I
they're,
understand
But how could they
that.
possibly
So-
make the argument that
So if
we
they're going to
were-
give it to us
we
one
had-
time, why not?
Right, exactly. How could they argue that we were entitled
How
to it
about
at the
if we say
beginning, but not
including
5 years
limited
from?
to? I mean, I'm all for
well, have you got
flexibility.
a place where you want to put this?
Page 17 might be B1, page 17.
Are we on the resolution?
On the
Yeah.
revised
Yeah.
ordinance
Yeah.
that Amy
And
sent out this
maybe
morning?
put it out differently.
And I haven't passed out the red line.
Oh, okay.
Should I
Okay, so,
do
yeah.
Why don't
Citing to the one.
Do that so we can look at that instead of we're looking at.
Yeah.
It is confusing.
3.65.120 discusses monitoring and
use
then
this for-
remedial actions.
Now
And you're saying page 17, Tim?
Yeah, on the
That's
version
okay.
I've got.
Sorry.
3.65.120, section B.
I'll pass that around.
Okay.
What? Oh, we don't have.
We have a version of this, but not the red lines change.
Yeah, well, I have the resolution.
It's on your email.
Yeah, we got it by email.
That's right. I did see that.
Yeah,
right
17.
before I left the house. Yeah.
Yeah, what I was citing to is the non-red line, first version.
Okay. What was which number?
This section is 3.65.120. Section B talks about remedial actions, and it kind of lists some of the things that can be done. And the first one is requesting project documentation. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is how detailed do we get? Because what this is a road, if you don't comply, this is a road to decertification.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we can put a clause, comma, including current rents, or including, yeah, that doesn't cause me any heartburn.
Is that where you put it?
Yeah, I think it's included there. That's including but not limited to.
Yeah.
Schedule.
Is that, I mean, maybe even current rents and lease agreements.
That could be.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
So that when they're applying, they know that that's something they'll be.
Lease agreements that are signed by the occupant,
Yes.
you might have a hard time, you'd have to get a waiver from the occupant.
It could be in the
Some kind
lease.
of privacy.
Well, yeah, just in terms of their privacy.
Well, the only thing that's theoretically should be in there that's different from everybody else's is their signature.
So you may be connecting somebody's name to a unit, and when you do that, you may be making a document public that says for a domestic abuse person, somebody who's suffering from domestic abuse, where they are located. So I'd just be a little bit cautious about connecting the privacy of an individual into the program. But I like the content of creating, having something like you have to provide us whatever the base form is for the year, and you have to notify us of changing rates or whatever those things are. But I'd be cautious about the people.
But that information we receive as we function as a city already, and it's not that creates a public record. So are you concerned?
I'm concerned.
We have
But we don't
utility
get who
information,
lives
which has
on
the exact same information, so.
But in an apartment building, we don't usually, right?
It seems to me if you
Well,
use
that
the
it's paid
terminology
centrally.
lease
necessarily.
agreements, and
You can
someone
request that it be delineated.
pushes back legitimately on a privacy issue, that language would certainly entitle you to the form of lease. So maybe you
It
don't
can
need
be
to resolve that
redacted
issue
too.
today.
Yeah,
Right, we
right.
we could say that the lessee's name is redacted
Yeah.
before it's transferred. I'm great with any of that. I just want to make sure that the person isn't being outed in
As
the.
long as the apartment
Right.
number is there. Because,
Yeah.
if we're going to have mixed income, right, and we've got floors and floors of market rate and a floor of low income so that they can get the tax break on the land.
Yep.
They could show us the ones for the market rate.
They can show you all the information as long as it doesn't tie to a person.
Yeah.
So as long as the name is redacted and there's no proof tying them together, you can still get what their income levels are. You can get all that content. You just can't have the name of the person. In my mind. She's still thinking, no, that's
I mean,
fine.
I guess I'm just wondering what the difference is between, this function and when we have that
Utility
same
bill.
information on any other records that people
Yeah.
have with the city.
My guess, and I would have to go back and confirm, but my guess is that you can file something, an injunction, or something with the city that says, please do not disclose any of my content. When I get a GRAMA request or an open records request, I don't provide that information, but this isn't our document. This is somebody else's document. So I just would hate to take information in that then wasn't redacted out, so.
Because you weren't looking for it.
Yeah, okay. So as long as we somehow have a way of protecting an individual, I'm ready.
Okay. Fine with that.
But this is on our next agenda, so we need to hammer out.
It's not going to
tonight.
pass.
We're not going to approve it
Gotta
tonight,
vote.
we're going to talk about
I
this.
have a whole bunch
I have
of other
other-
things that are
okay.
problematic that
Okay.
we're going to have to come back to this,
Okay.
unfortunately.
In order to hit your January deadline, I would ask that if we're going to make amendments tonight, which is great, that we make amendments that can be made within the time period so that we can make approvals before the January 1st
won't be
deadline,
ready.
or we won't be ready.
Can we pass it in the last meeting in December as an emergency?
Tim?
If we have it in the last meeting in December,
So 17,
what is that?
19.
17th, 19th?
Oh, 17. No, 19.
No,
It's like
19th.
Fifth
Right,
and
5th,
19th.
right.
And we put an emergency clause on it, so it's effective immediately.
I mean, even December 5th, we're not having 30 days, right?
I'm not here on the 5th.
Yeah.
It means as long as we get it right, I'm fine not being here for the vote conversation, but
It still wouldn't be within a
it's
30.
also
It
pretty
still wouldn't
tight.
have 30 days.
So I'll tell you what my big problem is. I'm going to bring up a couple others, but my big problem is the green certification we're requiring. I discovered during our hearing that our list of green certifications it's garbage. It's literally, we have certifications in that are utter greenwashing. They have zero efficiency standards whatsoever.
Are you not the ones that are in the
Yep.
ordinance?
Code. Yeah.
Yep.
It's our existing
So that
ordinances.
didn't get vetted by staff before it came back to us, which I thought it had. And I only discovered that because I saw the list of what had qualified the Galaxy building
Oh, the green globes.
for their,
Yeah.
green globes. And I kept looking and looking and looking, like, where's the energy efficiency in there? Nothing. Nothing.
So I'm actually in agreement with the mayor that the standards are not great and do not hit what I believe the goal was when you guys set the goal. And part of my concern is that if we're going to spend some time on this, which I think is a worthwhile discussion, I want to make sure that we're recognizing what the costs are to the development, depending on the standard, and that we're prepared to hold ourselves to the same standard. So the standards that I've seen, and I've talked to this issue for the last year, are that LEED is an exceptional program. The verification associated with it gives you a solidly green building that you can stand behind and believe.
LEED at certain standards. So I was very clear in the work
Sure.
session that LEED silver was not acceptable. That was not a strong enough standard for me to be willing to give away another floor.
And I'm great with that. You can require them to build to certain energy points within the LEED program. There's a bunch of ways to get around it.
Right.
We're not building a library to that standard today,
Actually, we are too. We are. If we're doing Path to Net Zero, we are.
but there's no verification from LEED. So as long as we say it's that you have to have a certification from Path to Net Zero or a certification from LEED, I agree with you that you're going to get there, but the certification is the only way that staff can assure that the standards met in the construction. Because we're not going to have people going down to another build and saying, oh yeah, I think this is close enough. right? I need somebody to have a piece of paper that they attach to their application in order to get occupancy that says that they met this standard. And part of the problem too is that some of the green standards require you to go back and do a certification after a year. And that's really, there's no tool for us at that point to say you did or you didn't, because they have their occupancy at that point, because it's a year after the construction of the build.
There absolutely is, because if, in this portion.
In this portion there is.
Obviously, the fifth floor, we can't make them take the fifth floor away.
Right.
But in this portion, we can say, no, sorry, you are not meeting, your building did not meet the standard you set out.
And we can set up this conversation. I'm great with it. I agree with you in terms of not liking all the options that are outlined. I just want to make sure that council understands why this is going to be a complicated discussion and why it may throw us beyond the deadline associated with Amy's deadline for January 1. So there's a couple ways we can do it. We can try and put the green conversation on for December 19th and have the dialogue at that time. But even with that, I'm not sure that you would then be able to get it adopted and approved in
Could we
time
get it into the
to.
study session?
Let me tell you, hold on a moment.
Because we can get it in the actual code. It's not like it's going to be some huge addition to the code. It's going to be a list of things, just like there is now.
Can I make one just addition,
Please.
one consideration?
Yeah.
Because when we came in the fall to talk about what the sustainability local requirement was going to be that you wanted, we pulled language. The language that's in there is from the code, as we're talking about, and part of that was the reason for staff proposing it that way was that we were not creating anything more strict for applicants that were currently in the land use process to meet, who had been kind of understanding that we were going through the vertical housing process, hoping that they would still be eligible regardless of what additional local requirements we added. And so something to think. I don't know how that complicates all this.
The mayor's comment is that what he realized that code was the problem. And I respect that code is the problem, that base code that we've got to fix. Unfortunately, it's throwing a loop into what we're trying to do here today, and it could be a loop into current development that's in design. Because as we've also talked about, when you create a new standard for the building, partially through the design stage, it adds costs for change orders. So there are certain people who have come through working with us through the application to the state and then into this process today that have received approvals for their density with the belief that green globes is sufficient. So if they're going to go back and change that now, that is going to add a significant amount of cost and impact to the building, because it is a great program, because LEED and Path to Net Zero and these other programs really are very rigorous.
But you're talking about somebody whose application is already in.
They're in for the state, I believe. Amy, is that true? The current application that we're talking about, it's not in yet.
They're not. It's not in vertical housing, but it's in land use.
There is no program for them to apply into.
But they did apply in for their fifth story, and we've approved for their fifth story. So.
Yep.
Well, so I guess,
There is no building built, however, and we were.
Well, I don't think we can change the rules on a building that's gone through their land use process.
Well, we can't make them maybe change their fifth floor, but they don't necessarily have to get a vertical housing tax credit because they're not meeting
But wouldn't
the standard.
Wouldn't what's in place now apply?
No, because
There
we
is
haven't
nothing in
received an
place now.
application.
Not for VDA.
So their land use, he's saying,
But the
is
land use.
That was approved.
That's approved.
Unfortunately, that barn, portions left the barn, and that's another conversation, but.
You could grandfather some and set a date for when you had to meet a tougher standard.
Yeah.
We have received their preliminary calculations. They've run their calculator, the state calculator that we're going to adopt. They've run their calculations through that, and we've taken a look at them, but there's nowhere for them to apply at the moment. So they haven't applied. Otherwise, I believe they would have.
Well, there's nothing for them to apply to. We haven't set standards.
Right, but if
the state program was still in place and
They
if we
would've-
had,
yeah.
after we had
October.
dedicated, yeah, they would have.
second, we would have.
If what?
It's this switch to the local government, they would have applied through the state once we approved the district. But we put them on hold because we're in the process of creating a program locally.
They could have applied to the state, but they've chosen to wait.
No, the state's discontinued.
Ended their
Oh, they
system.
couldn't, okay.
So there is currently, as of today, there is no vertical housing tax credit system.
Oh, okay, period. All right.
Anywhere.
Okay.
So we are preparing to offer somebody 10 years tax-free on a very large portion of their building. And without some kind of standards, we get nothing for them.
So I have another question. We have another applicant that's not going to be coming through this process that we're trying to develop a separate process for nonprofits to bring similar tax abatement through. Are we applying the same design standard? Okay.
And they are already meeting it.
They're going to be,
They're intending to be really close to net zero.
okay.
So
It may be worth then making the application equal, if they're going to meet it anyway, just so that you're.
that's a further conversation. I mean,
Well, it seems like we have way too many unresolved tangents to get this all cleaned up for
5/27.
January 1.
You can't.
Yeah.
If you want to have this component included in it, if you want to change the ordinance around design, green building design, you won't be able to hit this.
I mean, I guess my inclination is to go with it the way it is for now, and then in the winter, do a code fix for both the zoning ordinance and this.
so let me ask you a question. And I'm just going to make up numbers because I have no idea what 80% of a $30 million building is. But let's say it's $50,000 a year.
Well, they gave us numbers on North Main,
So
and North Main only ever got waived like 60%. It never had
it's not
more
a
than
5-story
60.
building. There's no way it could get above that.
Right.
You have to have a
Right.
5-story building
To get to 80%, that's
They
right.
will get to 80%.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 80%. on
Well, actually, I'm
taxes
not
of
sure that's true.
30 million-ish
Yeah.
on the tax of a $30 million project.
Right.
And the city is not getting low-income housing. The city is not getting a building that will be the kinds of standards we need our buildings to be to even come close to any kind of a climate goal whatsoever. We're giving away 10 years of taxes for kind of nothing.
But it's not, I mean, he played by the rules we set.
These rules are not
Haven't been
set.
set. Yeah, that's,
Well, but
Well, he was following the state standards, which is what we were incorporating.
No, because the state system as of when was done.
October 5th.
I know, but it's been around for years. I mean, this is a developer who knows,
Who knows how to
Knows
use,
how
who's
this
been
works.
used it in other,
it wasn't a new program to this developer.
but don't they also know that we were having this conversation?
And there was no guarantee.
And there's,
We were gonna
right,
pass
that we
this.
would agree that
This
those
is
were going to be
not
the
like a
local,
foregone
the
conclusion
local
that we're going to
criteria.
pass a vertical housing tax credit.
Or that it would absolutely look exactly like
Yeah.
the states.
States. Yeah.
That's true.
So I get
I'm
prefetching, but to some degree, that's the risk you take.
I totally hear you. And if you guys want to go down this path, it's absolutely within your purview to do it. I think it could impact the design, and I think it could impact development. And I don't know that for certain. You'd have to ask them directly. But I think that they've been talking to people about getting financing for their development, and they're using this information in order to do that. And so if you change it at this point, there is a possibility it'll affect them.
Well, what about the grandfathering in
You
by
could do
a
that.
certain date of whatever's in the pipeline?
That is totally up to you. I think the mayor is correct that there are substantial differences in the types of programs we're talking about. and having a certification that says you've actually achieved something and documenting what that is and focusing on the efficiency if that's the goal. Needs to have a certification associated with it that has value. And I think that the programs that he and I talked about tonight do have value in that way. And the other ones have less value in that way. It's a question of, do you want to affect all, or do you want to affect ones that haven't been working with us today? And I respect either, but I would be remiss if I didn't open up the possibility that this could affect the financials associated with the development.
Well, and that's a conversation that can be had over the next few weeks.
Yeah.
Peter, what's your availability next Monday? Did you see that email?
I did.
Okay, so we'll be having a meeting with people who are experts in these standards.
Yeah.
These standards get you energy efficient buildings. These standards do nothing. And we should have a pretty straightforward list by the end of Monday.
I think we could get the ordinance changed. The question is, if you change it for all developments, are you disproportionately affecting certain individuals? And if you want to affect them that way, I'm great. I just want it to be a conscious decision. So, Denny, I've invited Denny as well to be in that discussion with you. Because I do think that if you want to do this, it's speeding up ordinance changes that take priority over some other projects that we're working on right now as a city. So just trying to balance that out.
Well, if we're going to do that, anyway, with the zoning code, then why don't we wait? Why do we not do this till we've got that ready?
I agree with you. Apparently, the timeline on him getting his financing for this building is all tied to him getting a vertical housing tax credit, knowing that he can get one, knowing that he can qualify for one.
We have been talking about having development happening on Main Street starting in January, with buildings coming down.
With what? Buildings coming down?
Buildings coming down in January. So if we aren't settled on what the financial package is associated with that, they won't hit that time frame. And that's, like I said, this isn't, it's not my job to create time frames for developers. But it's going to start affecting things.
I'm just having a really hard time with the idea that someone was potentially guaranteed financing based on a conversation that a city council hadn't even had yet. That there were are we saying that
No,
there were guarantees of some sort?
I'm saying they've been making expectations, and it's not guarantees.
Well, and
You guys
Alma
have not
told us
promised
that
anything.
months ago.
Yeah.
When she first came to talk to us about that, she told us that this was a crucial piece of the financing that we were looking to do.
For future, I guess I didn't understand that someone right now in the process was.
Oh, no, I did. Yeah.
Well, I understood that they wanted it.
I understood that they wanted it, but it did not, and it doesn't make any sense to me that there's any bank in the world that's like taking that they don't all, based on some timeline that is currently in process, that there are designs, there are guarantees that are made along the way.
So when I talk about
There isn't some out, I guess is what I'm saying.
Oh, there's an out. There's absolutely an out. The issue is, so let's use the library as an example right now. Once we get in, we're talking about going into the design component, right? Going into detailed design work for the library. We've been told we have to make decisions on the type of infrastructure we're going to place into that for our HVAC system, because once they design the building, it's a change order in order to change the design. The efficiencies, there are three different efficiency models within that design, and each of them require different rooms to be built and the installation of the units to be included at different points in the building. So we've seen initial drawings, and we've had discussions and had initial approvals about a site review for one of the sites on Main Street. They've gone through a significant amount of design work in order to be prepared to take down a building and start construction. They've done this based on the concept that green globes would be sufficient, because that's what they got approved for their 5th story. That's that's just what they got approved for their fifth story. So that's the design review that they've been banking on. In order to change that, to make this building more efficient, you're talking about changing the energy system. More than likely, you would have to increase the efficiency of the HVAC system in order to make it work. And if you do that, it's a change. That could cost more. In our case, we've talked about it costing.
But that's in order for them to get the vertical housing, I guess.
They're playing a whole bunch of pieces of trying to make a pocket of money work. And I'm not an expert here, so Alma's not here. I'm pretending to be Alma. It takes funding from all different sources to make their performer work. And they got initial approvals that we were going to do a vertical housing. I thought it was not for them, but that we were doing the vertical housing, we were expanding the area, and that there would be an efficiency component or a green building standard associated with that. I'm guessing that we said something effective. We already had that in place here in the code. So this is what we're going to be using in order to define that. And they started figuring out whether or not they were going to meet that standard and whether or not they could realistically bank on getting the vertical housing based on that standard. That's going to shift. And that's okay. If you guys want it to shift, it can shift. But my guess is when they've done their pro forma, they've been banking on a certain amount of value.
That's the word banking on it is the problem I have with this conversation, because there's no to me, if I'm an investor in this project or however this is working, I'm not banking on vertical housing at that point. I'm banking on everything that they've been able to do so far that were actual guarantees. A conversation that's months out from those things are not connected. There was no banking on this decision. Maybe they're hoping for it. To me, it's icing on the cake.
And it is very possible that you're right.
Would you give someone a few $1 million if they're telling you in an application that the city of Milwaukee is considering a vertical housing and it might have these standards and it might look like Oregon's?
But they haven't given them the money yet. Or what they're saying is that based on this historical state program, they felt like they were going to qualify. And they used that. And from day one, I'm sure, when they're developing this project, I'm no expert either, by the way, so I'm not.
You are on the right track.
But I feel like that this is not something that's just new to them. This was a piece that was planned for.
Well, they didn't even
and
know.
And now, at the last minute, if we're changing the standard, it could very much affect their financing.
When did we get approval from the state to expand the area?
That's what I'm looking
October. We applied July, got it October 2nd.
So until October 2nd, they didn't even know that building would be in the area.
But they were also told that was what we were asking for, so they were hoping.
But there's no guarantee that the state's going to give it to us. So there's all these, decisions that are coming. There's no way that this thing hinges on
a 2-month period between our 3 months of.
Well, I don't know enough about how the financing works and what the chronology is, and whether he's just whether he's even he doesn't apply for anything, and maybe until he got his land use approval, and then he really does the applications. But I mean, he's just going from his experience that or in his calculations of what he needs. I don't who knows.
And he's not here tonight, and I'm representing somebody who's not here, and I haven't had a conversation with. So this is totally up to you guys as to risk. I am simply telling you that I see some risk.
So in any case, there is time between now and any other decision we make to ascertain realities for the developer, to come up with a list that perhaps they're willing to meet to get the 10 years of tax abatement.
You mean specific efficiencies that
A new building
different
standard, a certification system.
Tighter certification system than what we currently have. Those are all possibilities too. So we don't have to pass it tonight in any case.
Nope.
And we will know a whole lot more next week.
Yeah, but I also don't know what schedules are. I don't know who's in town. I don't know how long it's going to take to draft an ordinance and to get it approved to the standard of being able to put this before you guys. I will do what I can in order to get it before you on for discussion for the December 12th study session. Right now, it's a 3-hour study session, so it's going to probably be in another hour after that.
And you're saying that we have to fix the base ordinance or the zone?
We don't have to fix the base ordinance.
We just modify.
Well, I mean, we
Fix that
need to.
We do have to fix the base ordinance.
But for now,
For this, we don't have
do this.
to modify this. We use the same standard we're going to use, or we're going to propose for the base ordinance in this, and then fix that in January or whatever, but
Because I think it's going to lead to confusion for applicants, I'd like to fix both of them as quickly as we can. So if we can, because I think that people will build to one expecting the other. And I'd rather give them a very solid message up front as to what the expectations are for development in Milwaukee. And we
again,
can do that. I
it's
don't
not a
think
big complicated change. It's a change of one paragraph in
Yeah.
that whole code section, and then one paragraph in this. It's not like we're rewriting a whole bunch of code.
I'm actually scheduled to come on December 5th for the ordinance. We knew that it
We've
wasn't
been
going to
leaving
get
this on.
approved
All
tonight. So we have
December.
that as already scheduled, and then if we still needed December 19th and we can get on it, that could be another discussion. I know you're not here, Mayor, but
I might be able to call him. I can't remember what the schedule is.
And it's actually a really easy night if we wanted to try and address this further on that night.
I also wondered if there's a way to structure the ordinance that it refers to the code. Instead, but being clear is also helpful in our ordinance for this. But we could have it say, based on the code standard for green building, and then if that gets changed, or maybe we keep trying to move this forward and say, but we're not going to issue any or approve any applications until February 1st, or push it out.
I think that there's enough discussion on council about this that we need to resolve this before we approve it. So we can try and get this before council as soon as possible.
And our January 1st goal deadline was for financing or for decision making on that.
And also that was our first available date by the state.
That's as soon as we
Maybe
could.
we have to add back a
There was
January
no-
2nd meeting.
And I'm actually totally.
I mean,
we can address the single issue if you guys are interested.
Yeah. Could be a one-issue meeting.
Yep.
I'm curious.
And then if it was passed with an emergency clause, it would be back immediately.
Right.
So December, January 3rd.
Right. So we missed 2 days of the year, so.
Well, there will be no applications coming in because the offices aren't open. So there's no harm in that, at least that I know of. But let me talk to Amy and all that afterwards and just make sure we're not leaving problems.
Okay, so on the agenda tonight, we won't have item D under.
We'll leave it because there's more to discuss
Okay.
on it.
Okay.
I have other concerns. We can do it now, but I think we have
Yeah, we have.
other stuff we need to.
We actually had, this was a pretty open period of time.
Okay.
We do have the attorney discussion that we're going to do tonight, but those are the only big discussions. So if you guys want to take a little more time, we'll find 15 minutes.
I have some concerns that might kind of throw a wrench into it too. So if we want to keep going, I think that probably makes sense to leave more time.
Can we go 15 more minutes?
I'm sorry,
here?
I can't hear you.
I said I also have concerns, so if we want to keep going on this for 15 minutes, I think it makes
That'd be
sense
great.
rather than just, if we have time now, I don't think it makes sense to push something.
Okay,
For later tonight.
thank you.
How about I just watch the clock and then it's 5 o'clock? Yeah, 5 o'clock. We'll
Yeah.
move to our next
And
one.
that way we can give enough time to the other discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we able tonight, or at this discussion,
Talk about
to
fees.
to finish the fees part?
Well, so
Yeah.
given that there are going to be concerns about their green certification, given, and there's going to be verification process on that, given that there's going to need to be an annual or some kind of regular verification on the affordable housing aspect, if a building got those, are you comfortable with that fee structure?
It's still low, but we were looking at it from a cost recovery standpoint, and we roughly calculated that with the proposed fees that it would be around 15 hours of staff time. That could include
Each
me,
year?
building official, per application. What?
Forever?
What about the
Annually?
annual, though? The monitoring.
So for 10 years.
It would, yeah, no, I mean, it's 15 years, 15 hours total per application.
To look at the plans, to understand.
I'm not saying that it won't be more than 15 hours. I'm just saying, but what we've proposed, it kind of balances out to around 15 hours of staff time. So we could go up if that's necessary.
But it seems like the original application fee, if the state thought 550 was acceptable 15 years ago, I have to assume that if they were doing this again and people were looking at it again and saying, yeah, it's taking whatever amount of time, 500 probably is not sufficient.
550 was set 10 or 15 years ago. It was probably like $1,000.
That's kind of where my head is.
So increase the initial fee.
Increase the initial, and then I would seriously think about how much time. And if you want to write in that we check every 2 years, so it's not an annual thing, whatever, but that there's some kind of regular check-in, particularly if there's a low-income aspect to it.
Are you suggesting a fee attached to that
Well, we theoretically have a fee that we're charging
ahead of time?
At the beginning, yeah.
At the very beginning when they get their certificate of occupancy. And that, in theory,
should
is
go
supposed
for
to
the-
cover
Forever.
the 10
That's
years.
what I mean, in theory, but but that was before we had more discussion about making sure that we're monitoring it at some time, whether it's every year, every 2 years, or whatever. So if we're, hypothetically, if we're monitoring it every 2 years, so staff's got to go back and check with things or whatever. So is there a suggestion or a thought then in that discussion that the 3% is
0.000.
upfront is not, 0.003% is not sufficient, or that there should be a biennial monitoring charge or something, or what? I mean,
Does it make more sense to have a regularly charged charge? And maybe that only comes into play on low-income housing stuff. But then we're de-incentivizing low-income housing.
Right, yeah, and we don't,
So you think it should be a one-time charge when they get their occupancy, and it's sufficient to cover the costs of monitoring for 10 years?
I don't know that is sufficient. I don't know that we have a good answer to that. So I think that we should have an answer to that, and we should just bake it in at the upfront cost. And I just don't like the idea. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Part of it
Your
is
fees, your budget is a policy statement. And to me, we're saying, we're going to charge more to disincentivize affordable housing.
No, I agree with that philosophy. I'm just making the point that it is going to cost us more as a city to manage.
We also
those
need
than it
to know
is
what
other buildings.
that we're going to ask when we do those monitoring. What's that look like? What kind of information are we seeking? What are they giving us? Is it something they can just give us a quick report? We can peruse it, that's it? We being, like staff.
Right.
Well, I don't think we want to be
there
too
more to it than
prescriptive
that?
on that. Yeah,
That's why I
let
think
that evolve.
We were talking about the including, but not limited to, as long as we have the information that we need to be able to verify.
And that may be very different with two different developers, right?
Exactly, yeah.
There may be somebody that, has a track record of compliance.
They know what to do.
What they're doing, and one that does not. Yeah.
So what was, I'm trying to remember the ballparks on those two, on the .003 for a
She gave them
certain
their
value.
$1,500 for a $5 million
Wandered away from that page back to the code.
$8 million.
So I don't want to leave where I finally found where I wanted to go.
Yeah, for a $5 million project, it would be $1,500 for the
$5 million projects.
0.03%.
Then on low income, it's lower.
1,000.
Yeah. It's only 2%.
So, but if, you know,
Valuation for 50% of the units.
so if you're talking about a $30 million project, that's 6 times that, that's $9,000 on top of the, whatever the application fee is.
That should, I mean, I'm trying to imagine the amount of staff time this is going to take and who the staffer is and therefore what their wages are.
Well, and some of these are going to take hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
You know, we take somebody to court and we go after them for not meeting the stipulations and for fraud. It's going to be really expensive.
Isn't that
I think if we get to that point, that's a
Sure.
different pot of money. That's recovery on a.
It is, but it's still a lot of staff time, whether or not you want to court. But on the flip side, it may be, you know, five minutes once a year going out and going, yeah, these are all legit, looks great. We do a lot of programs where we don't recoup the full cost. So part of this too, to you guys, is do you want to recoup the full cost on the affordable housing? There's nothing that says that this isn't a policy move and you guys want to pay general fund dollars in order to run it.
So maybe throwing this out there, that we would have an answer on maybe the paying for what it would cost, you know, in terms of staff time. What does that look like? And then somehow come up with a fee that matches that cost, that estimate on just the people doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And anything above is something we absorb because it's not something that you anticipate. You don't anticipate people not complying with the policy. I don't.
You don't?
No. I don't think that we write.
She's one of those glass half full people.
I just don't think we write the fee that way.
Don't write the fee that way.
I agree with that.
The state hasn't, I think what they told me, they've never had a decertification.
Yeah.
But they just.
But have they ever actually gone back and checked?
They don't.
Yeah, they don't monitor it either.
It is different when they're not local, they're not driving by it every day. I mean, this is a conversation that we've been having, is this, it's a different situation now that we're here and it's in our community and we see it every day. And we
Well, and
keep
it's a
an eye out.
big hit to our community. I mean, it's not nothing.
Is there a reason why, if we're talking about staff time involved, which is a flat rate, why we're doing a percentage of a project, which one project versus the other is going to be enormously different in the cost? It's for the same amount of work, because the amount of work you do does not reflect the value of the building necessarily.
Are we assuming that maybe because there are more units, the higher the number gets? I mean,
That was the assumption.
Yeah, and I think that's probably.
But granite countertops do not require more. Right, so I hear you on that front too.
But we're not valuing on that anyway, because aren't we valuing on the same way we value for the permits?
Right. So,
Which doesn't count
which is square footage
granite
and
countertops
number of
or
toilets and number
fixtures or anything like that.
If we did an analysis and it turned out that it cost city time $2,500 or whatever, I think we're going to have a hard time charging $9,000 on some project without getting.
So maybe maybe we can't answer tonight. Maybe you guys need to sit down, you and Sam and whoever, sit down and go, okay, realistically, what's this going to take us time-wise? Who's going to have to work on it? Therefore, what's their hourly? And come back to us with at least some kind of a educated range of, okay, we think we'll spend this much time to approve the application. We'll spend this much time to check all the initial stuff when they first get their occupancy. And then on the low income one, because that's the only one I can think of that's going to be an annual or semi-annual or whatever, check in. This is how much time it's going to take us to check that. Because I can't imagine, I suppose they
You're
could
not gonna
convert
move
a bunch
office,
of
to office.
residential to office.
Because we get business licenses at that point, it would take us about 4 seconds to find out that they had moved to business.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't have that problem.
Shouldn't have to check
We
that.
did run through this roughly, and that's how we we just didn't know what the threshold would be from your perspective. Like, do you want us to go higher? Do you want us to, or how in line do we need to kind of?
We want you to absorb
Yeah,
most
with
of
the
the
state.
costs.
Okay.
I mean, that's my opinion.
What we did feel like.
Not the recoup, sorry. Recoup.
Yeah, that's
Being the conflict.
The opposite.
Well, we did
what I
feel
said.
like some of the monitoring would happen with the building official. She's the one who goes out and does the certificate of occupancy, and she would be part of the team who is aware of what was applied for. And then when she goes, so there's some overlap in that sense. There's still more time. It's a team of people. It's going to involve the building official, some planning staff on the whatever project it is, and then economic development as well. So we could take a closer look.
It seemed like you had it seemed like you'd already done an estimate on that, sort of the questions that are at the front. The only question remaining in my mind is we don't really have an idea about what the annual check is. Right.
Yeah. Or biennial, whichever one.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe this was Shane's point, if we get to calculating too finely and it's clear, and we've run calculations and it's clear that we're charging more, I mean, it's costing us more for affordable housing, but we're charging them less. Are we opening ourselves up for some kind of challenge?
That's possible.
Well, my challenge, if you say that the cost recovery for this program is X, but we're charging quite a bit more in Y, I think that's a potential challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially since a fee should be cost recovery.
It seems to me one area that is legitimate in terms of a little bit of fudge is that one of the components of cost will eventually be an enforcement situation. Maybe the state hasn't decertified, but you may have to at some point. And at that point, you will want to have collected something to have in a kitty to deal with that. So that may give you but I agree with you. Cost recovery, if we say we're actually transferring costs from one type of project to another. I think
Well, okay, then would it be more legit legally if it was the same fee for whether there was low income or not low income, knowing that the low income is going to cost us more? Does that bring up less red flags of this is cost recovery and oh, by the way, you're paying more than the low income one, which actually costs us more?
So
I think you can lose money on cost recovery and back end it with other funds. I don't think you can charge more than the cost.
yeah.
And I think in charging the same, what you're doing is essentially operating on the assumption that we can't really predict what the cost will be for these various projects because we don't know how much enforcement, we don't know how complex. So a default position might be first.
And that's entirely true, right? Well, it's all new to us. We don't know what it's
Right.
Yeah.
First time we've been here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not even other cities, so
Yeah, exactly.
There's not a lesson to draw from someone else.
Once you have a track record, you can change it.
Right.
Amy, when you did the analysis for the time for the application fees, it's only $500 worth of staff time. And the monitoring is a separate issue, or is that the application processing and monitoring?
We were kind of looking at it as a total, so if around $2,000 per application for a $5 million project. We just kind of lumped it all together, and then that's how we kind of quickly added it up, and that looked like 15 hours, which we're guessing at how much time it would take, but we thought there would be some efficiencies with the work we already do to review these applications and having buildings they get the as-built already when they do the certificate of occupancy, and so we were thinking that was in the ballpark, but we could look into it further for sure.
It is also 5 o'clock. So let's continue this conversation to the council meeting tonight. Sorry, Amy, you get to hang out.
That's great. I'm just planning to be here.
Cool. We'll see you in a little bit.
So ready to go into executive session?
It's not an executive. This is going to be a public.
Very good.
So I'm happy to introduce it just because the topic was brought to me by a couple of you. There's a reason that there's not a staff report associated with this. Every couple of years, council has a discussion about how you receive your legal services. Under the charter agreement, legal services are contracted by the council, so they are outside of my portfolio. And I've had a request to start that conversation for this year. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Councilor Abma, if that's okay. Sure. And we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, I think that there are pros and cons to both approaches, and if you've seen the Westland and all, there's nothing surprising about those pros and cons, but I think that for every couple of years, as Ann said, it's a discussion that we should have. I'm still, even a year in, not completely clear what we spend on legal services. I've looked at the budget, but then legal services can be a line item that's considered professional services in some of the different departments, which doesn't break it out for me as clearly as I would like. So I'm not sure what our cost is. I know that as Milwaukee has a lot going on, I won't say that we're growing substantially population-wise, but we sure are growing in a lot of ways and things that are going on. And I think there is some benefit to having someone in-house that you can walk down the hall to and ask questions of. At the same time, the negatives are, we know that Jordan Ramus, another Tim, has incredible institutional knowledge. She's been in Milwaukee for a long time. It probably costs less overall to have outside counsel. But then there's a potential preventive cost when staff doesn't go to the attorney first because they don't want to run up the bill and mistakes are made and then you have to pay more to correct the mistake. So for me personally, I have done it both ways. I have been a city attorney, and now as a metro attorney, I see some advantages of that. I've also worked for a firm that was the city attorney for many cities. For me personally, doing both, I think the negative of when I worked for a firm, I was always cost conscious for their bill, which meant that I either did more work and I didn't bill it because I took the hit, I don't want to give them a big bill, or I didn't sometimes feel like I gave the full amount of time I would have given to this project if I was on a salary and this was my job, this is my full-time job. So I personally have found as an attorney for the government in-house has more advantages, but it does cost more. So that's just my opinion. I wasn't sure how others felt about it. I've talked to a couple of you, and I think that there has been, in the past, some on council who would like to maybe move to an in-house. I don't think that there's any particular size of city that makes it work or not work. Hillsborough is a very large city. It still contracts outside counsel. It's the largest in the state of Oregon that still does that. We've seen small cities like Canby that is in-house. So I would now open it up to others and see what your thoughts are, but I would like to at least start the conversation, and it's no offense to Tim, who does a fine job, but it's, I think, a conversation that a city should have every couple of years because there is a cost involved, and it is a contract.
And Councilor Abma, just because you mentioned the money component, Tim also had something that he and I talked about earlier today about where his firm is, so I wanted to give him a chance before we go any further just to talk about costs.
Well, like you, I've worked in almost all situations. It isn't just black or white, in-house or outside. I've worked in situations where I'm the outside counsel and city attorney, but there's an in-house person who's actually there backing me up. And in other situations, there's an in-house city attorney, and I have a contract to do all the specialty work, and the firm does the backup. So there are a lot of ways to do it. In terms of our firm, it was created with the idea that we wanted to provide the best lawyers possible in a range of specialties that local governments needed. And it derived, the idea for the firm came out of my experience in-house at Washington County, where we had 5 lawyers, and even with 5 lawyers, we were always going outside for help because life is more complicated. And that was a long time ago. So that issue of breadth of knowledge has been important in terms of the formation of our firm. On the economic side, a couple of observations. One is we have a very low rate at the moment, which we can't sustain over time. It will have to be increased because in a law firm where you're trying to get the most able people possible, you're going to have to pay those people. So we're up against that pressure. That being said, another observation I've got is that your city manager and department heads have this year, I think, worked very closely with our firm in terms of cost containment. And this idea of maybe call at the start, spend an hour or two at the start of a project and then bring us in at the end rather than going off on the wrong path. Everybody's getting much better at that. And I think the numbers right now are about half of what they were last year. And really, I think roughly running about half of last year's cost.
Is that subtracting the lawsuits we were involved in last year?
I think part of it, the explanation is the litigation last year, but part of it I think is just more efficient use of the service.
We also, last year used Jordan Ramos for the Elk Rock Island management, policy management, and that was actually a substantial number of hours that at least took most of the budget out of the city manager's office when I moved.
So I think we're getting more efficient, but we will have to, the other side of this will have to raise, go back to the rating first. The other issue, I guess, is perception of the public of the independence of the office. That has not been an issue here, but in West Lynn, for example, where that letter is from, the sort of the backstory there is the city manager, new city manager came in and immediately proposed a budget, eliminated outside counsel and went to in-house, and proposed an organization chart where the city attorney would answer to the city manager. Proposed that regularly for years, and regularly the city council said, no, we're not doing that.
How about not?
Yeah. And eventually that became a public issue. That people began to see that as an effort by the city manager to have more control than it sort of spiraled, and we've had a lot of controversy based on that. But I think it illustrates that in a pinch, things are stressed when there's division on the council between factions or a component of the community that isn't happy with something the staff's doing. The question of the independence of the city attorney's office becomes a question. Well, this city, as far as I know, has not really faced that issue. It's blown up other places. Your history is that you once did have in-house counsel.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yates was the lawyer here. And when I was contacted about representing the city, the basic situation was that even in those days, things were not quite as rapid and complicated as they are now. The feeling was that there just wasn't the breadth and firepower available. So initially it was a conversation about maybe backing up an in-house counsel, and then later it became a decision to go to outside counsel.
And how long ago was that?
Let's see.
Roughly?
Before I had kids.
A long time.
So,
okay.
Yeah, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
6 years ago.
Okay.
You know, I'm with you. I see advantages and disadvantages in both systems.
Neither one's
and it really
perfect.
Yeah, and it often depends on where you're standing with that.
Wasn't there, I can't remember how long ago, Lisa, Mark, help me out here, we did a financial comparison.
I think it was the
2015.
late
It would have been like a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago.
2 years
something
ago.
like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe that type of information, to reprise that, might be helpful for the discussion, you know, if this goes further.
Probably an updated version.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, that's what I mean, you know.
Something that's 2 years old now.
Exactly, yeah. Well, it's like the West Lynn one, I mean, the first thing I noticed was it was 2012.
So it's almost 6 years old.
You know, yeah, a few years ago. I get the basic concept, you know, but if we're going to explore something, then we need to look at more relevant, you know, information.
Well, and again, you're guessing. Right?
Of course,
And
absolutely.
so to me, it's less of a financial conversation than it is a functioning of the city conversation, because you're going to be guessing on financial position in any case. And I would imagine, even if we went with an in-house attorney and they had a paralegal or whatever it is they need, there are going to be absolutely times when we're going to have a contract with an outside
We still
firm.
have, right.
Because there's going to be expertise that our current council doesn't have. So we're going to have to be contracted with
Absolutely.
an outside firm. I don't know how you get past that unless
We
you
don't
have
think-
both ways.
Even
I don't think you
City of Portland contracts
has
out on occasion,
contracts,
so does Metro. I mean, even the largest of cities have specialty on occasion.
And I think that information we looked at a couple of years ago had that information also, that you might want somebody for like land use or for this kind of litigation.
Well, and that's what, that memo from West Lynn kind of laid those out,
Exactly.
like
Same-
bond
it was a
counsel
similar
and certain
type of
specialty
memo.
kinds of
Yeah.
counsel. I mean, my impression of what we learned 2 years ago was that because of the need to, that hiring our own counsel with that person's benefits and, salary and benefits was going to cost more or less what our bill to Jordan Ramus is going to cost, or had been costing at that point in time. And so the cost of support staff and the cost of whatever, and I don't think a lawyer needs a full-time paralegal, personally. I've never worked in a place where any lawyers had a full-time, you split it 3 ways or something.
But an administrative assistant or something.
Well,
secretary.
I mean, even that, yeah. But I mean, whatever support staff and whatever additional outside counsel we have to hire.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember coming away from that conversation thinking, okay, it's probably going to cost the city $100,000 more to go this route. That was sort of where I left that discussion then. Now, it's true, are there staff who would walk down the hall because it's not racking up a bill and get better detailed counsel, guidance, whatever, So if we were making all those calls to Jordan Ramus, would that bill then be $100,000 more, right?
Well, that's the discussion that Councilor Beatty and I had earlier today. Part of this for me is I'm not sure this is a true reflection, because I'm not sure what I've been doing for the last year has been as what's needed for some of the discussions we've been having. In terms of, I think we probably need to be reaching out to Tim more and getting more service. He's been great. He's been doing this at my request, so I want to be clear that this was me trying to contain a budget that was on cost overruns. Mm-hmm. But there have been a number of times over the last year where staff was being very cost conscious and they didn't ask for the help. Mm-hmm. And I think that's real. And so I'd almost rather give you guys a real sense of what it would cost if we're going to go down that path, and have us spending the time that I think we probably could use the legal support. Because right now we have been very judicious in how much we're calling on attorneys, and that has its own pitfalls.
Well, and I think it has some pitfalls to workflow too. If you're in the middle of working on something and your head's wrapped around it, and you I need to know this one thing. And if you could bop down the hall and ask that question and get an answer, okay, now you're back in your workflow and you're continuing to go. Instead of shooting an email to Tim or getting a phone, well, Tim's out of the office, he'll be back at 3, or he'll be back tomorrow, or whatever.
But that'll happen with your in-house counsel
To
too.
some degree, but
And
less.
somebody
They'll be going to meetings, they'll be going on other
But they'll be
projects.
aware of what you're working on before it gets to
There's
that
going to be
point.
more
So you'll have that
availability of an
guidance.
attorney to you as a staff member. And again, more likelihood, at least I would be kind of the same way if I was on staff. I'd be like, well, I kind of think, I'd look something up online, okay, that's probably right, and then go with it rather than seeking
Having somebody else do it.
advice.
Another example is Chuck's been trying to do a lot of his own ordinances. He's got a substantial amount on his plate. And he just does that. He sort of takes it all in and he owns it and he feels like he needs to do these things. And the reality is he's overwhelmed and overworked. And having him have somebody next to him seated, whether that's Tim or somebody else, is really probably where we need to go. But that's going to get very expensive with the number of projects that I need him to get that kind of help on.
One of the things we've done in another jurisdiction to deal with some of that is to schedule a couple times a week physically here. So that
office hours type thing.
Yeah, and we don't just show up with no plan. Typically, half the questions are from in that jurisdiction from the planning department. And so somebody is in charge of assembling what are the issues this week. So that when we arrive, there's a half-hour conversation about those issues. It's pretty efficient. So that, I mean, we're conscious of the fact that face-to-face discussions and things is very helpful.
I think both are valuable, and I've worked with both, and I am supportive. This is a council decision, and I am supportive of additional research. If you guys would like me to do additional research, I can compile additional pieces of information. I'm sure Tim would be happy to share that information too. Part of this, and I don't want to get into it too much because we're in open, is negotiating rates. And whether or not your firm is expecting new rates, I think is a worthwhile dialogue before we get too much further in this discussion, so that you also have a real number about what that's going to look like in the coming years as you're making this decision.
Yeah, we've been trying to do some work recently on with different rate options based upon the hours and the usage you've had in the last couple of years, what would that look like? So I've got some information on that. And I probably have a little bit more updated information in terms of cost comparisons between cities and stuff. We do track that.
So would you guys like me to bring this back with additional information around costs, hours? I'd like to talk to staff with the expectation, if I go to them and say, I need you to communicate with an attorney, probably 20% more than you are today in terms of calling when you're in the middle of a project, whether or not that's office hours, figuring out what that looks like. And I have to own some of this too. I called Tim today. Half of my staff is on Thanksgiving break. And I said, hey, we've got an ordinance problem. I need you to help me solve it. Immediately he dropped everything. I really appreciated that. But those are the types of things we're having. And in-house is typically easier because they are here. And I can tell you, or Christina can tell you, how to reach them instantly.
Well, and the beauty of having the in-house and the contract is if the in-house is in a meeting right at that moment or gone on vacation or whatever, well, you can also reach out to your contract and say, we need help on this thing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's like having a bigger staff.
Part of this too, just so people know, as you're looking at calculations, when I hired Christina, I did so and held a bandwidth expecting that this person, should we end up with an in-house attorney, would have to provide service there. So Christina is in place. My expectation would be that she would be able to provide service for me and a city attorney and the assistant city manager if that's needed. So I, at least for the first year, would not recommend having a discussion about additional staffing levels at that point. If you went down this path and that person wanted additional help, we could at that point have a discussion. But in conversations with Shane and with Angel and with others just around what kind of support we really need, I didn't get the sense that any of you thought that we needed a paralegal. Or even really a full-time assistant. And at that point, I can carve out time within existing staff.
So where could you carve out space for another person?
That is a discussion I don't want to have today. But I have thought about it, and not actually just for the attorney discussion. The city is growing.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm concerned about that in general.
Yeah, where's your assistant going?
Would you like to hear these? I can get into this for a moment.
Oh, yeah, there's.
The very brief discussion that I've had is that while we're looking at the facilities CIP for you for coming into the budget cycle, is figuring out what it actually would cost for us to transition this space into office space and transitioning the bay into a community room that we could hold work session in. It's expensive too, and I don't know if it's an option that you guys want to look at, but at least making this building more usable and more accessible to the public, and that is a very accessible space in terms of being able to connect into our community. My predecessor actually looked at that as well. We have designs and drawings, so we kind of have a way to scope out what it would cost if we wanted to go down that path. But that's just one of many. We've also talked about the need for future discussions about a city hall, and
Exactly. And I think the need to bring like all the JCB people over here, or to have one site. Wouldn't that be awesome to have one site? Then they could really walk down the hallway to the attorney.
Well,
which I couldn't do now.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because who needs the attorney more? Probably it's out at JCB.
People. Yeah. Exactly. That may be where if we had an attorney, that may be where their office is.
When we have on-site meetings, that's typically where we are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But also creating a one-stop shop so that you could come in and you could pay your water bill, or you could go see the planning staff, or you could get your building permit, or you could, and everybody goes to one place so that it's not confusing to the public.
Yeah.
There are a lot of benefits to centralizing our staff, but it's expensive. And right now we've got some other big construction projects on the table, and I'm working on those. So I'm going to keep working on those, but in the CIP discussion this spring, we will have a discussion about office space. Okay. I can give you a commitment that if you make this decision, I can find them space, and I will find them space. So don't worry about that piece. That piece I can manage. But as we grow, we will have to address that.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, not just for this position, but for, all the needs of the city.
Yeah.
It's something that's been on my mind a lot as we've started making all of these changes around us.
We've talked about Sunday parkways and creating our own Sunday parkways. And as you create these bigger events, these more specialized events, do you need more dedicated special event staff? Jason is doing it. He's doing an awesome job, but he's also doing NDAs, and he's doing some other programming. Do we start carving those pieces off and refocusing and shifting? These are important conversations for the budget, and we don't have a lot of money. Right now I'm prioritizing based on your 3 goals to bring forward a budget, and then other priorities based on council and staff recommendation. But there will not be enough money in order to do all of this. There is, because it's kind of like Councilor Beatty was saying, a trade-off between in-house and out-of-house, and whether or not you're spending the money.
Right.
It's not a huge amount of extra money, especially if I have an in-house staff person as an assistant. But it is a big policy call that you guys need to make.
Before we close, you've seen the memo, obviously.
Yeah.
Forgetting
you actually responded to it back in 2011.
Okay.
Along with 2013.
And then 14.
Some parts of it are correct and some are not.
Well, I was going to ask you if there was anything, forgetting the numbers, if there was anything about the pros and cons generally of in-house versus contract that you disagree with.
I guess what comments would be, he makes the point that if you have one in-house city attorney, you don't have conflicts. I've seen in-house city attorneys have conflicts. And I think we're pretty sensitive. Our private clients understand that if you ever have a dust-up with the jurisdiction we represent, we're not representing you. It's well understood. And there's a statement here, because there's only one client, the priorities of the city attorney mirror those of the city council. And I don't know a situation where we didn't loyally follow the policy decision of the city council. And I just think it's not even a consideration. And then the one thing, of course, he leaves out is the whole background for this, which was this sort of question of credibility of the city attorney and the independence of the office being apparent to the public because you're from outside. I mean, I'm so thankful we haven't had this argument here. It's been a 5-year deal in Westland.
I would not recommend copying the Westland model. I told that to Tim today. Please don't copy.
I will say for the record, we're making that work, and the current city manager is excellent. She's done a really good job of figuring out how to organize it, but it did take a long time to get there.
So Just so that I have some direction.
Yeah.
What pieces of information would you like from me and from Tim or from me directly in order to make this conversation continue in December and January?
I would want to have you have a kind of an in-depth conversation with all of your senior staff to say, imagine having somebody down the hall. How much benefit do you see that giving you in your workflow and what you're trying to accomplish? That to me is the big driving question.
And I will tell you that staff is interested in having somebody down the hall. And it's not because they don't appreciate Tim. It's because you can pull them into a meeting super fast.
Sure.
But I will get you a more definitive answer. And we didn't talk about this tonight, but this year you did not do a staff review of all 3 of your staff.
I was going to ask about that.
You did it of me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciated it. But you actually had 2 more employees.
Right.
So the other option is that we also can go into closed and have a discussion about performance, both for the judge and for your attorney. And I think that if some of the feedback I get goes into that realm, I'd recommend that you do it in that kind of feedback loop.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
I think it'd be nice to get maybe 3 years history of what the bills have been.
Happy to.
Not
And
just
granular
one. Yeah.
also, so that we can sort of.
Oh, yes,
so
so
that we
definitely
can-
separating out the
Yeah, so we can take out the
litigation.
stuff that we
Yeah.
shouldn't really anticipate happening all the time.
It also can be separated by department. Because we had that in our budget discussions, right? Is
We
that where
do.
I'm remembering that from?
We actually have it in your quarterly report that we provide from Haley, and she has been working on pulling out dollars that come out of professional fees as well as the attorney fees, so that you have a better sense of that. So I can get you that as well. In terms of the granularity, that'll require us to go through the actual bills, which we can do. But Kelly is currently doing the purchasing code through December, so it probably wouldn't be till January that she'd have time to dig into that.
Okay.
I came across the Westland one. It was on the web as I was looking at the election results or the upcoming ballot measure. But I know that Hillsborough did a discussion like this a few years ago, to the degree that we could get that if it's public and they're willing to share it. I'd love to read it.
Sure.
Whatever was provided a couple of years ago when this discussion took place before Angel and I were on, I think you had sent that to me before, but I think it would be a part of the packet or the discussion. And then I know that, for example, Sherwood recently went in-house just a couple of years ago. I'd be curious to know if there was a way we could talk to them what their experience had been, if it had been a positive move or if it was a regrettable decision.
And I am happy to do that. I've had conversations about the benefits of having an in-house attorney, even as recently with Tiger, about their move and transition. And actually, it's Shelby who left Jordan Ramus, who is lovely.
Yeah, there really wasn't a deep discussion in Tiger at all. The situation there was Shelby in the office was contemplating taking a job in Salem, and that would have forced me to make a decision about where I want to spend my time, because I've been much more engaged in Milwaukee than Tiger, and I made the decision that I made the decision not to get more deeply involved in Tiger, and I made the suggestion to the city that Shelby move to the city in-house and that we have a contract to provide backup and other services. So that's kind of how it happened. It wasn't the process.
And there's no report there. I did check. But I'll put it out to the City Managers Association and see what I can pull up, just so that you guys also get anything from the last 5 or 6 years that they may have developed.
Well, and my thoughts were to look at a couple of the cities that have been busier cities that are more our size, like Wilsonville, Happy Valley, that have a lot going on development-wise, and sort of their thoughts on, because I know Wilsonville has 2 attorneys and a paralegal and another staff member, something like that.
I think that's right. 4.
Yeah.
We will keep anyone busy.
Yeah.
Just so you know. If you guys hire an attorney, I can guarantee that I will exhaust their hours. That is not.
It is basically on a per thousand basis the most expensive place there is in terms of.
And they have such a industrial and business base. So they probably have such a bigger tax base than we do.
They also run a transit department.
Yeah.
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 Right.
Yeah, they're definitely busier, but,
Yeah.
but, you know, we are all of a sudden in the midst of a lot of redevelopment, and it's not going to slow down, I don't think. And we have the downtown, we have the north industrial area, both of which it's going to be.
That might be the argument for hiring more planners.
He's going to make that argument too.
I've already had that.
Told him to give me a lot more
I will say that what's happening now in the city is it's sort of what I envisioned at the time I decided to take on the city as a client. I was thinking, well, this has got to be a place this is really going to happen. And then it's great.
for a while.
It's finally here, you know.
Yeah.
So in terms of timing, we'll come back in January, just knowing how much we've got going on the end of the December pipeline. We do have the SAFE and SSMP planning process for a couple of those meetings, and that's going to be a substantial conversation. So just so you know, that's what I'm balancing against.
I don't think there's a giant rush here. We're not in an emergency. It's just a sort of a.
Okay, then I can guarantee that I can get it to you by February, and we can get it on the council agenda.
Yeah. Are we thinking we'd want to know which direction we're going to go before we get into the budget finalization? Because that, to me, would be
It's a good idea.
one of the big, areas to consider.
But going back to the fact that I think you're probably close-ish, it shouldn't be terrible, but I would like to hear from Tim if we need to renegotiate our rates for your firm in that time frame.
Yeah, I mean, I think I need to get some numbers to you as quick as possible.
Yeah.
We want to evaluate this in terms of what the real future looks like. So.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
You're up.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you for
All
the
right.
opportunity.
Thank you so much.